Welcome back to our study in Colossians chapter 2, and today we are looking at verses 16 and 17. We're talking about don't accepting the judgment of those who are not believers, of those who are not God. That's what Paul's talking about in this passage. So this paragraph begins with therefore. Remember the old saying, when you see a therefore, figure out what therefore is there for. So in verse 16, Paul says, let no one pass judgment on you. The therefore points back to why they should not let people judge them. The answer is that Christ fills them. He circumcised their hearts. They are buried and raised with him. Their trespasses are forgiven, and he is the head of all rule and authority. They, being in Christ, are under his judgment alone. These people that are declaring judgment against them are not authorized to do so, and they shouldn't accept their judgment. Remember, Christ is the only one that can judge, and they're in Christ. So if he says that they are clean, that they are sanctified, they are justified, then his judgment is the only true one that they need to listen to. Now they are being judged because of food and drink and the keeping of the festivals, new moon celebrations, and the Sabbaths. These are all referring to things that have to do with the Jewish religion. From the beginning of the church, there was a false teaching that tried to combine the freedom that is found in Christ with the ceremonial law of Moses. They would be called Judaizers. They believed that Jewish Christians should maintain the old ceremonial ways and that Gentile Christians should submit themselves to the same regulations. Those that lived a life of freedom, like the Apostle Paul, were met with harsh judgment. Even the Apostle Peter was doing the same thing. Paul mentions the dietary restrictions, the festivals, which refer to the yearly celebrations like the Feast of Booths, the new moons, which they celebrated once a month, and the Sabbaths, which were all the other holy days, like the Day of Jubilee. The Gentiles had not kept these celebrations and regulations, and the Jews no longer needed to. These were only a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Paul says that the reason why these believers didn't need to accept these judgments from others is that those things were merely shadows or pictures. The real deal is Jesus. When my wife and I were dating, she gave me a picture of herself that I kept in my wallet. When I was away at school, I would look at it and think of her. Imagine that when I came back home, I chose to spend time looking at the picture instead of spending time with her. How foolish that would be, right? Or what is even worse is if I was on a date with her, but I chose to speak to her picture instead of her. This is what Paul is saying is what happens when you as a Christian try to keep the ceremonial law. Those things pointed to Christ, but now you have him, the real deal, the substance. Why would you go back to things or choose the substance, the shadow, the shadowy part, if you have the real substance? Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. Those that do that are those that are judged. Those that leave behind the shadows and don't pick those up again, those are the ones that have the true substance, that have a real relationship with God. Otherwise, you're just going after the shadowy things. But God has provided the substance. So it doesn't make any sense for us as Christians or even as Jewish people to go back and try to keep that ceremonial law, because that was merely a shadow of things that were come. And the Bible in the Old Testament talks about that life is shadow, that these things are to pass, and they did. And so now we don't need those shadows anymore. I've heard about Christians, and don't know personally Christians that have done this, but have tried to incorporate all the ceremonial laws. And some there are different denominations that try to do that, try to bring in some of the old ceremonial law stuff. And it's like, why would you do that? Those are shadows. That's not the reality. Now we live under the law of Christ, the law of love. And that is so much better, because that's the real thing. Obedience to Christ, not obedience to just the law. You have the law of Christ now. And he told you what to do. And those things that he told you to do, you do. And those things that he said are no longer needed, those are but shadows, then you don't do those. So that's where the difference is. That's where we need to pay attention, because it's foolishness. It's sad to go back to those things. Some people think they're going to be closer to God by doing that, but that's not true. Those are but shadows. So come back next time and we'll continue on and we'll look at verses 18 and 19.